Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the top 5 ETFs for Canadians to invest in. This is especially good for beginners, people who are just getting into the investing world and are trying to find good ETFs, especially found in the Toronto Stock Exchange in the Canadian market. And these ETFs that I recommend are personal ones that I have invested in. It is worry-free. You set it, you forget it, you buy it, let it sit there, continue to put contribution in for 20, 30 years, and by the time you're ready to retire, you will be a really wealthy man or woman by just simply investing in these ETFs. In the video, I'll also be talking about past performances in these ETFs. Keep in mind that past performances don't always necessarily translate to future performances, but these are good indicators to see how well the ETF has done for the past 5, 10, 15 years, depending when the ETFs was first started. So before we begin, let's quickly break down for beginner investors what an ETF is. ETF stands for Exchange Traded Funds. And so it's basically like a mutual fund in a way that it holds a basket of stocks, which are individual shares of companies. In one ETF, you can have hundreds or even thousands of stocks within one ETF. And the great thing about ETFs is that it simply tracks an index in the market, such as something like the S&P 500, the 500 biggest company in the United States, or you can pick whatever index you want to track, and it will just simply follow that index and hold the stocks within that index. A lot of the time ETFs are passively managed, which means that they don't have an active manager trying to pick and choose what stocks to put into the ETF, because it's simply following that index. So ETFs are a great way for you to keep track of your investments by simply, for example, if you are following the S&P 500, you can pull up the S&P 500 index and just see how well your ETF is doing simply by looking at how well the S&P 500 has done. Another wonderful thing about ETF is that it provides simplicity. One good ETF can have exposure to great markets, to the US markets, to Canadian markets, to the international market by simply holding one ETF, because you have so many stocks and so many different exposure to different stocks around the world. So before we dive into the top 5 ETFs, a few things to consider. These ETFs that I'm recommending is for long-term investors. So if you're investing in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the longer the better. If you need your money within a year, 6 months, short term, I do not recommend putting a huge amount into investment, and really do your research. But these are, again, for long-term investors who have a longer time horizon and who want to be in the market for the long run. So earlier I talked about the S&P 500, which is the 500 biggest company in the United States of America. So a lot of these companies, people know them. We're talking about the Nikes, the Chevron, Amazon, Tesla, and these companies are so big that they have exposure to international market. You think about McDonald's and how many stores it has overseas. So a lot of times I recommend people to be involved in the S&P 500. So 2 S&P 500 ETFs that I really like is VFV and VSP. So I myself have more involved in VFV, so we're gonna dive into that and talk more about what VFV is, and let's break down what it looks like. So as you can see in the graph, VFV started in January of 2012, and since inception, it has done 18% annually compounded on average, which is awesome. And another thing is that its expense ratio is relatively low. It's 0.08% expense ratio. This means that you are being charged 0.08% to be invested in this ETF. So one thing I really like is dividends. Yes, we don't want to focus on dividends, but dividends are paid out quarterly in VFV. In the long run, you want to focus on growth, but the dividends, I always look at it as a bonus paycheck. And if you look at it, it does pay out quarterly, which is awesome. So it's always something that you can look forward to every few months down the road. It really adds up in the long term, but like I mentioned, the growth on this ETF is also massive by itself. So if we're gonna look at the top holdings in the ETF, we're looking at Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. This ETF really is involved in the S&P 500. The company I just listed, yes, a lot of them are tech heavy, but so is the S&P 500 because it's weighted that way. So many of these companies have either factories overseas or people overseas working for them. So in a way, you're not just being involved in the S&P 500 and US companies. In a way, you are investing in the whole world economy where people have invested time into these companies overseas. The second ETF that I recommend is called VEQT, and this is an all equity portfolio. And I really like this portfolio because it has exposure to international markets, to actual international markets. We're talking about stocks and companies overseas. So if you look at the breakdown of VEQT, there is no bonds, it's all stocks, and there's no fixed income. So I'm okay with that because, like I mentioned, this is the long-term holding. I am not a big fan of simply having fixed income and bonds, which are safer, but in the long run, I want more growth in my portfolio. Again, if you have that time horizon, I think holding something that's more equity and more stock heavy is more beneficial in the long run, depending on when you need the money. So VEQT started in 2019. It's relatively new and it's averaged 15% since inception compounded. And something crazy is that if you look at its holdings, it has just under 13,000 stocks or holdings within this ETF. So you're talking about holding 13,000 potential companies in this one ETF. Talk about diversifying your portfolio in this one single ETF and have exposure to international markets as well. So if you look at the expense ratio, it's 0.22% MER, which is not bad at all. So if you want some ETF with exposure to international markets as well, I would recommend VEQT. So since I am a Canadian and this is geared towards Canadians who are investing, so the third ETF that I recommend is called Vcn Canada All Cap Index. And basically what this means is you get exposure to the large, medium, small company within Canada. If you look at the breakdown, it has a mixture of large cap, medium cap, and small cap companies. We're looking at well-known established Canadian companies such as RBC, Shopify, BMO, Canadian Pacific Railway. It's companies that Canadians know, and these companies are what you would be invested in if you are invested in this specific ETF. So this ETF's MER, if you take a look, it's 0.05% MER, and it started in 2013 and has done around 8% annually. Obviously, if we look at something like VFV, which has done significantly better, it's because the Canadian economy isn't as strong as the US economy. But I always think it's great to hold, instead of US focus, you also have some Canadian exposure by having VCN in your portfolio. So as for dividends, this also pay out quarterly, which is awesome. Another bonus paycheck to look forward to in your ETF. So yeah, if you love Canada, I recommend VCN. And number 4 is one of my all-time favorites, and this is the US Total Market Index. This ETF is called VUN. The reason I love VUN is because, similar to VCN, it has exposure to large, medium, and small companies within the US market. We're talking about the entire US total market. So you're not just invested in the S&P 500, the 500 biggest company, you also have smaller companies within VUN. So this way, we're betting on the whole entire US economy now. So if we take a look, this ETF started in 2013 of August, and rate of return since has been around 16% annually, which is fantastic. If you type in any of these numbers into a compound interest calculator, you'll see the amount of growth that you would have by simply investing in these ETFs. And again, if you look at the MER, it's 0.15%, which is relatively low, and it's something that I would really recommend to look into so you get exposure to the entire US market. So once again, more dividends. If you haven't noticed a trend yet, up to this point, most ETFs pay out dividends, which is awesome. All these dividends, like I mentioned earlier, do add up. It's really something that you look forward to, and you wonder, oh, how much dividends will I get next month? Like, that's coming up every quarter. So I always think it's an awesome bonus to have. So now if we just look at the top 10 holdings in VUN, it's very similar to VFV, but again, it has exposure to small companies as well and mid companies instead of, like I mentioned, only the S&P 500. The fifth ETF that I recommend tracks the NASDAQ, which if you don't know is more tech heavy, it's more hip, it's the younger, cooler brother compared to the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones. We're talking about big, massive company as well, such as Apple, Amazon, Tesla, PayPal. These are big tech companies that are more futuristic and going towards that direction. And so I recommend VEQT, so you can track the NASDAQ by simply purchasing VEQT. So since January 2010, since inception, the past 10 years, it's returned 19% on average, which is incredible. I will continue to be into this ETF as I believe in technology for the future. So the top 10 companies that you're looking at right now in this graph breaks down 51% of what's in this ETF already. The MER for this ETF is 0.39%. If you love tech, if you love futuristic stuff and younger and cooler trends, I think the NASDAQ is something that I would recommend. So there you have it. That's the top 5 ETF. And if you haven't noticed, it's more North American heavy. And the reason being is I believe in the future of North America still. Yes, China might be up and coming. There's other parts of the world. But like I mentioned, I think so many of these companies, the Amazon, the Apple, the Teslas of the world have buildings and factories overseas and have people working for them. So you have international people working for these companies. So in a way, they also have exposure. And yes, some of these ETFs, a lot of them actually hold similar stocks. I'm okay with that. If 2 of them hold Apple, I'm okay with that. In the long run, in the grand scheme of things, I think overall you will do well holding these 5 ETFs. So one thing I would recommend is to hold these ETFs in your TFSA or RSP, something tax shelter, preferably the TFSA if you're gonna leave it for 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, and just let it grow over time. And keep putting money in every single month if you can. And I believe in the long run, you would do really well just investing in this ETF. With that said, that's the 5 ETF. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We really appreciate your support. If you liked the video, drop a comment below or hit the like button, and we will try and continue making more videos. And until next time, take care, guys. Have a good one. Stay blessed.